All right, so over the next 10 minutes, we're going to be talking about SEO, or search engine optimization. And you know me, my name's Jimin. And after the 10 minutes are up, I'm hoping that based on the actionable information you'll have, you'll be complete masters, and you'll be experts at SEO or your money back. So let's get started. Backward in context. So SEO, what is it and why should we care? So search engine optimization is the process by which you improve the visibility of a web page on like a search engine's unpaid results. So essentially making sure that your pages get up higher and are more visible whenever people Google something related. Why should we care? Well, we can make apps now, but if people can't find it, it really doesn't mean anything, right? And this study by ComScore shows us just how much people actually Google and use online search engines. In 2011, in just 1 month in the USA, people Googled more than 20 billion times. And the top 10 results on Google had an average click-through rate of higher than 50%. So click-through rate is a very important metric, and it's simply the number of times your link gets clicked divided by the number of times your link is shown. So obviously you want a higher click-through rate. And this just implies that the higher your ranking is on Google's results, the more likely you are to be clicked. I just put this infographic here to demonstrate how critical it is to Google in this day and age. People are going to be Googling, and let's make sure that your stuff shows up there. So now, talking about search engines, how do they work? Any story of search engines requires you to begin at the start. That's web crawlers, which Steve alluded to. Crawlers, robots, bots, spiders, they're all synonyms. And Google's main crawler is called Googlebot. And how it works is the following. A robot has a list of like billions of URLs that is on its to-do list. And as it goes through, it checks all the links that it points to and makes sure that those still exist. And if there are updates, it appends them to the list. And then uses this and sitemap data by the webmasters themselves to just check all the pages and go through the rendered HTML. It's pretty bare bones what the crawlers can see. So if crawling is the process of gathering information, indexing is the process of organizing it. So once it has all the information, there's a Google index, which is basically just a massive index relating keywords and different possible search parameters to different pages. And that's really where the magic happens, where when people Google like how to sell WoW accounts, it tries to figure out what you're trying to do, and it orders the pages in order of relevancy. Google's goal, its mission, is to provide users with fast, relevant information. And relevancy is kind of tricky. Each search engine has their own sort of secret formula, and we know for sure that Google has over 200 factors. We don't know all of them. And we'll go more in depth later. Popularity is very important. Google assumes that if you're more popular, the stuff you have to say is more valuable. So if you imagine Google to be like a very, sorry, I just put this song here, not because REO Speedwagon is awesome, which they are, but if you imagine that Google is the really popular high school teenager who has trust issues, they're going to want to hear from their friends that you're cool. So if you're new on the block and their trusted friends tell them about you and people are talking about you, then that's going to score some points with Google. And ultimately, that's how you get higher page rank, which we'll talk about later. Pop quiz. So the panda, penguin, and hummingbird. Does anyone know the common chain between these animals? It's kind of a rhetorical question because I don't care. I'm going to tell you right now. Panda was first rolled out in 2011 in a series of updates. And it was an update to Google's search algorithm that enabled them to attack thin content websites. So if a website had a bad like add to content ratio, or if they didn't produce enough unique content and they were like content farms that pulled a bunch of stuff from other sites, it really doesn't add much to the user experience. So they really attacked that with the Panda update. Penguin was also referred to as the web spam update, and they targeted spam. Shady practices like content cloaking, where you show bots one thing and you show users another, or where you just stuff every keyword under the sun into like your tags, were penalized. Hummingbird was a complete game changer. It came around in 2013 and it changed their sort of approach to the whole search algorithm. Prior to Hummingbird, they did like exact keyboard matching, but after they went to LSI, which is latent semantic indexing. And it's basically a fancy way of saying that instead of looking at just the individual words, they looked at the phrases and words holistically and tried to understand what you're looking for to help deliver the best, most relevant results. So the search algorithm today, I'll just gloss over this part because it has a lot of things we discussed. Keywords, every search begins with keywords, what you type into Google. The title tags are very important because they're supposed to summarize your site. So try to stick some keywords in there. Links, backlinks, or recommendations, that's essentially how Google will gauge how relevant you are. If important sites are referring to you, that's like Google's friends telling Google that you're cool. Relevancy has three main components. Age, that's the age since first indexing. So since you've been around the block, the longer you've been on Google's radar, the more relevant you're likely to be. Authority goes to PageRank, which we'll discuss later, but it's essentially how relevant you are, how likely you are not to be useless. And content, of course, is critical. So next, we'll talk about PageRank. PageRank refers to Larry Page, one of the co-founders of Google, and it essentially tries to determine how important or relevant a page is. And it does it with this formula. Obviously, it's changed a lot since they first published the paper, but PR there is the page rank of the site that's referring you or that's pointing back to you with the backlink. So going back to the high school analogy, if the prom queen recommends you versus the guy who never showers and has no friends, Google's going to take that recommendation more seriously. The C is the number of recommendations or backlinks. If there's someone, all things being equal, if someone recommends a new person every single day, then that doesn't hold as much weight as if it's someone who only reserves their backlinks for really key sites. D is the damping factor. It's a factor from 0 to 1. The standard that's being used is around 0.85, and it just it's an indicator of how much web surfers are liable to keep clicking. So if a web surfer is like on a site and they see a backlink, they might click it and go to another site and keep clicking. And damping factor 1 means that they just always keep clicking. So it's less than 1, so that that potentially infinite sum never diverges. It always will converge. And there's speculation about what other things might be important in their algorithm. So PageRank is, you can see that mountain there. It really shows how hard it is to get to the top. 10 is like the best you can hope for, but it's not going to happen. And just you start down here, and it gets exponentially more difficult to gather as many backlinks and quality backlinks as needed as to get a higher page rank, so that you appear more relevant. So what does this all mean for you guys? There are two ways to SEO. On-page optimization is stuff I mentioned, like putting keywords in title tags and making sure your images have alt tags and putting descriptive keywords on there. Making sure that your sitemap is decent and it allows for crawlers to easily access your pages. Off-page is all the grind work you have to do, like getting quality sites to point back to you. There are a number of ways to do that, but I won't go into them as of now. So final thoughts. Just want you to take away these key things. SEO might not be fun. It might interact with your content and might even make it worse because you have to think about how users will be searching for the stuff that you're trying to give to them. But it's still necessary because it's sort of the bridge between the users and us. PageRank is very important. It's one of 200 plus factors, but it's still critical in how Google evaluates your relevance. So make sure to think about that, and related to that, try to score as many quality, high page ranked backlinks as possible to your site. Don't return test.pass. It's very tempting to engage in practices that are frowned upon by Google. And there are less than honorable ways to score backlinks and to do this or that, but try to avoid that because Google can and will punish you, and then all your work is just in Google Sandbox, which is bad.
Still works. Let's check.
So here's some cool links. I can talk about this later if you want. And I just want to say thank you. And if anyone has any questions, now is the time. Or we can just like, that's it. Mark?
I think recently, there was a stat that came out that says more people follow Facebook links than Google things nowadays.
Huh.
Do you know if Google is kind of trying to take social site popularity like Facebook or Reddit or whatever into account for sites ranking now, or if they plan on doing that, or?
That's a difficult question to answer because I'm very low on the totem pole of things. Like I knew nothing about this prior to setting this up. But you got to imagine that they're aware of how much influence different social media sites have on people's ideas of what's relevant. And they're always improving their algorithm. So I imagine that they do weight different social media sites accordingly. Wait, Kim.
You mentioned Panda, Penguin, and Hummingbird, and I was wondering, is that like an annual thing that like Google does to update their search engine, or is that just a sporadic thing that they do whenever it's necessary?
So it's an ongoing process. So I'm sorry, like it made it seem like Panda was one big update, but it started in 2011, and it's a progression of updates that have a singular goal of improving what we see on their site and their
Yeah, I guess leading back to, I'm not sure who asked that question, but I wasn't Mark yet. I think Mark asked that question. Blocked websites, sites that Google can crawl. Have you seen any research on what, not only Google, but all these web crawlers are trying to do to get into these blocked sites?
Well, first there's a distinction between the dark web and the deep web. The dark web is stuff people want to stay hidden, like the bad stuff you hear about on the news. And the deep web is stuff that's just not indexed, mainly because it's stuff that doesn't need to be indexed. It's like people have their own little clusters of sites that they only want for themselves. So I don't think there's any real demand to be able to reach those.
I guess I was talking about specifically Facebook content, right? Everything that's happening behind when you log into Facebook, or specifically block social media sites that have a lot of backlinks and information about people and how they get to different places, but that Google has no way of keeping track of.
I really don't know what's being done on that front, but I imagine there are definitely lines that they're not going to cross. If they're not allowed to crawl through those, then they won't. That being said, like Steve mentioned, there are less than honorable people who just have their own crawlers and they just do whatever. They don't follow robot exclusion protocol or anything. And before I forget, I should mention that I mentioned robots are very stupid. They see the bare bones HTML, but that's kind of problematic for us because they really don't like Flash or JavaScript and dynamic pages. So if you have a single page app, there's a few ways to get around that. In 2009, Google allowed for this new standard for Ajax-based sites. And essentially, using robots.txt, you can instruct crawlers to go to a different state and render it on the back end so that they have access to it. Another way is just to take snapshots of the fully rendered HTML and direct them to those. But React, the library has a method called render to string you could use to make sure that the crawlers can see what your site's really all about in spells.
Yeah, so I feel like I should know the answer to this, but do those Google web crawlers follow any kind of protocol that the site dictates, like the robot.txt? Do they follow those standards that the
Yes. In theory, they're all supposed to follow robots.txt. You just put that on your top level, and it tells them how and where to crawl. So yeah, definitely. All right, I think that's it.